Hello, welcome back to the Notcast, episode 279 today. Is this ever going to end? It doesn't feel like it ever will. It feels like I'm going to be doing this forever and ever and ever. And of course, I don't have to do it. I only do this when I feel like it and when I want to. And some days I don't want to, and that's why sometimes there's a gap because I'm busy or I'm doing something or I'm washing my hair or whatever the reason might be. Today is 6th of April, 2023. And I'm starting off, I'm revisiting a band that I did right at the start of the Notcast. I did a couple of career overviews, one of Pink Floyd, one of Kraftwerk. And today I have decided that I am going to revisit one of those bands. You can tell by the title which one of those bands it's going to be. That's not necessarily a surprise. And of course it is a commitment going into something like this because you end up talking about loads and loads of stuff. Then you end up going, well, actually, I'm not just doing one about Pink Floyd. I'm going to end up doing like 14 or 15, talking through each of the albums and each of the periods and everything that goes with it. So that's my way of saying that today is going to be the first of too many, to quote the Senseless Things. I am going to be talking about Pink Floyd's 1967 album, which was quite influential, although I came to it very late in life. Piper at the Gates of Dawn and all the other various assorted singles and CDs and 12 inches and all the other kind of posthumous and post-activity releases that took place with that. Primarily because, surprisingly, it is, I think, 56 years this week. 56 years yesterday, actually. The Pink Floyd's first single, Arnold Layne, entered the UK pop charts. And it is 65 years ago today that the band's then leader, Syd Barrett, left the group. So it seems appropriate to do that. Pretty surprising, actually, when you think about the influence that Syd Barrett has had upon people's perception of Pink Floyd, but also in terms of his career, that he was an active member of Pink Floyd as a recording entity for just over a year. That year, a year travels really, really quickly. And at the same point, it feels like forever. So, yeah, there we go, Syd Barrett. So we start off with the first recorded works of Pink Floyd, which was recorded in 1965. And it was took until 2015 to be released. It was a long lost and much rumoured acetate single featuring 6 songs, of which only 2 were circulating, and I think they were Lucy Leave and Double O Bow, which were found and discovered a little bit too late to make it onto the Pink Floyd Total Eclipse bootleg box set, which was released in 1993. In 1992, the band released a box set called Shine On, which was, I think, 8 studio albums plus a CD of early singles. And people kind of thought, you've kind of missed the chance or the opportunity or the reason for doing a really big box set, because there was actually very little that was rare and unreleased on that box set. And that meant that the bootleggers put together a unofficial 4 CD box set, which they saw as a kind of like a companion piece, stroke answer to Shine On. And that was called Total Eclipse. And by the way, here is a copy of the Pink Floyd Total Eclipse box set. I don't quite know why they had that on there, with the peak of the pyramids and all that. This features most of the A's and B's that didn't quite make it onto any of the other releases. So that's Arnold Layne, Candy and a Currant Bun, See Emily Play, the single mix of Flaming, and versions of Scarecrow, No, Matilda Brothers, Matilda Mother, Scream Thy Last Scream, Old Woman in a Casket, Vegetable Man, Where Are You, Apples and Oranges, Power Torch, Jug Band Blues. And this was very much sought after in the 90s. Not so much now, because almost everything that's on it has appeared on the early years box set. So, for example, the version of Flaming that's on here is the US single. Scarecrow, the Gnome and Matilda Mother are Top Gear BBC recordings, which have been heavily bootlegged. Apples and Oranges is a single. There's Top Gear versions of Power Torch and Jug Band Blues. single versions of It Would Be So Nice and Apples and Oranges, a track called Nick's Boogie, a whole bunch of other songs. And there's a picture of Syd Barrett with a moustache. And as we all know, moustaches are a very terrible thing indeed. This box set, by the way, is now mostly redundant, as it has mostly been superseded by the early years, the later years, and the immersion editions of the albums. So if you see it, it's worth picking up if it's affordable, but it's not an absolutely essential must-have in your Pink Floyd collection. What is an absolutely essential must-have in the Pink Floyd collection, is assuming that your budget will allow you to go for it, is this enormous beastie, Pink Floyd's early years, 1965, 1972. This is very expensive, very big, very heavy. I've taken all the contents out of the box because I'm going to show you some of the contents in a minute. And the first bit of the contents which I'm going to show you, and this is the one of the very few official Pink Floyd releases I don't have in a legitimate form, was the 1965 single, which was released as 2 7-inches for Record Store Day, Black Friday, in 2015, primarily to make the 50-year copyright period and therefore extend the copyright of the release. This is an unofficial coloured vinyl 12-inch version of it that was released later, Pink Floyd 1965. Now available for about £17 on eBay if you know where to look. It features the first 6 songs recorded by Pink Floyd, at that point being Syd Barrett on vocals and guitar, Bob Rado Close on guitar, Nick Mason on drums, Roger Waters on bass and vocals, and Rick Wright on keyboards, alongside Juliet Gale, who did vocals on the track Walk With Me Sydney. If you absolutely positively have to own everything and you can't afford a few £100 for the double 7-inch, which was released without necessarily being announced or anything, so it just turned up in the racks one day, this is the way to go if you absolutely have to have the first single. This features 6 songs on I think a 45 RPM 12-inch, Lucy Leave, Double O Bow, Remember Me, Walk With Me Sydney, Butterfly, and a cover version of Slim Harpo's I'm a King Bee. Is it good? No, not really. There is nothing in here when you listen to this and you kind of go, oh, this band are going to be amazing. I mean, you might not think they're amazing, and if you don't think they're amazing, then there's definitely nothing in there that's going to tell you they're going to be particularly good. It just sounds like exactly what it is, which is people with not a huge amount of money recording a quick and dirty single which they chose not to release. The first recorded works of Pink Floyd, and Bob left in the summer of 1965, and somehow that slimmed the band down to that 4-piece of Sid, Roger, Nick and Rick. And sometimes I think what you do, and I've seen this with other bands actually, is you need somebody to leave the group to make the group what it is that actually sometimes it's not what you put in, it's also what you leave out that is really, really important, in the way that U2 had a second guitarist when they first started off in 1976. Suede had Justin Frischman on guitar, second guitar, in 1990, and sometimes you need to take something out of that to then have that, that perfectly balanced table of elements in the periodic table of rock. You need to have exactly the right configuration. At this point with this one, is even though you could hear it and you go, well, actually it's a pretty obvious R&B influence, you can hear the influence of lots of other bands that I don't particularly like from the same period. Possibly I would have thought Them, The Kinks, bands like that. Obviously huge Beatles influence as well, but at the same point, what you have with this, and it starts off with this, and it gets more and more pronounced as the singles go along, is Syd's very particular way of looking at the world that expressed and articulated something in the way in which perhaps most acts never ever get to. Because it's not just about what you're seeing, it's about how it's being seen. So for example, if you have a lyric about I don't know why the sun hits the sky, I think that's a Supergrass lyric. You then think, well, actually, if you took at that from a slightly different angle, you go, I don't know how the sky hits the sun, for example. And even though you're seeing the same thing and you're describing the same thing, you're describing it in a slightly different way from a slightly different perspective, which when you get to the song Bike, the last song on Piper at the Gates of Dawn, where he sings, "You're the kind of girl that fits into my world," and you kind of then think, that's not about I'm going to fit into your world, it's about you're the kind. It just flips it on its head, turns it inside out, and makes you realise you're looking at the same thing but from a completely different angle as to everybody else. And it's possibly one of the reasons why Syd is, I think, so revered and so highly thought of these days. So we had the first single. This is the reproduction version from the early years box set on 7-inch there, which has Arnold Layne backed with Candy and a Currant Bun, previously also known as Let's Roll Another One. First released in Britain on the 10th of March 1967, hit the UK charts on the 4th or 5th of April 1967. Hit the top 40s like a breaker. And I love Arnold Layne. I think it's a great, silly song. It's a song about something that's, or a slice of life that's known to the people that were in Cambridge. There was a guy that went around stealing people's clothes off, women's clothes and bras and things off washing lines in their gardens. And that's exactly what Arnold Layne is all about. And yet, the way in which the song describes it makes it sound, it's kind of japey, it's kind of silly, kind of character observation type stuff, the type of stuff that Blur made a career out of in the mid-90s when they did songs like Arnold Layne or whatever it's called, and things like that, and Stereotypes and Charmless Man, character observations of a life that they haven't necessarily seen, whereas this was perhaps something a little bit more real. And of course the B-side, Candy and a Currant Bun, originally had the title of Let's Roll Another One, but was deemed a bit too druggy, so that wasn't actually used. This is the recording that I think was produced by Joe Boyd. Let me just quickly check. Produced by Joe Boyd for Black Hill Enterprises there, as it says on the single. There was a re-recorded version of Arnold Layne, which was recorded at the same time as Piper at the Gates of Dawn in Abbey Road Studios, but they chose not to use it. So it was considered as an album track at the time. And version 2, therefore, wasn't used. Whilst I quickly remember, the Shine On singles, the Shine On box set released in 1992, also had a 1997 early singles CD EP that featured CD releases of Arnold Layne and Candy and a Currant Bun. Single 2, See Emily Play, which was one of David Bowie's favourite singles, and backed with Scarecrow, and then the last one being Apples and Oranges, backed with Paintbox. So, yeah, I'm leaping all around the chronology, but being a Pink Floyd fan in the early years is a little bit difficult, actually, because there's so much stuff that's all there. Luckily, if you want to get all of the stuff from the early years, you need to use... If you want to get all the stuff from the early years of Pink Floyd, you do need to pick up this, which is called Cambridge Station. It is a CD and Blu-ray and DVD compilation of the band's early material. It was released both as part of the humongous early years box set, but also released as a standalone release. This, alongside the 1997 double CD version, or triple CD version, the 2007 triple CD version of Piper at the Gates of Dawn. If you want everything from the period with Syd in it, this is pretty much it. I think pretty much that's what you need to get. I'm getting into the reissues already, and I'm skipping away from the actual album, which I need to get to shortly. So See Emily Play was the second single. This was released on the 16th of June 1967, 6 years before I was born, so I have no memory of this whatsoever. I came to all of this stuff as a historical artifact. It was done and dusted long before I got into Pink Floyd. And I got into Pink Floyd on the 15th of July 1989, when the Venice concert was shown on BBC Two late at night, and I watched it and I was like, this is wonderful. And from there I then worked forwards and backwards. I got to the Syd Barrett era probably around about 2001, 2002. And so that was the period where I started to discover and get into that material. And mid-2000s was where I started to go really kind of deep into the Syd stuff, because I thought, well, Pink Floyd aren't going to make any new records. David Gilmour's probably retired. I should listen to the early stuff. And I worked backwards. And it's a long, long way from the early singles, See Emily Play, Apples and Oranges, obviously Arnold Layne, wherever I've stuck that one, and It Would Be So Nice and Point Me at the Sky, the early singles. It's a long, long way from that to when you get to something like Take It Back, for example. And See Emily Play was released on the 16th of June 1967. It was backed with The Scarecrow, an LP mix, or the same version that was used on the Piper at the Gates of Dawn album. And this was recorded at Soundtech Studios on the 18th of May 1967. And the cliche was, especially when this and Arnold Layne came out, was the idea was that the theory was you had to have about 10,000 hours to be competent at something. And it's fair to say, to quote Nick's own words, Pink Floyd had about 100 hours or 50 hours of being a band at this point. You know, there'd been a kind of like a college exercise or expedition, a college bit of work where the band were just, guys together at school, mucking about, making music, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, there was an album, there were singles, there were things going on, and they hadn't really done it. They hadn't really toured a huge amount, hadn't played a huge amount of live shows. What they had was probably more vision as opposed to technicality. So they had an idea, and having an idea is the most important thing. As anybody who has seen numerous modern films recently has known, it's all well and good being technically competent to describe something, but if what you're describing and what you're producing isn't something that's worth watching, it doesn't matter. It's a beautiful empty shell. Whereas Pink Floyd were probably the opposite of that completely, and were absolutely stuffed with contents and ideas and thoughts, but they weren't necessarily able to articulate it. But how do you do it? Where do you go? So See Emily Play then, Arnold Layne being the first single, See Emily Play being the second one. This, of course, remaining buried until 2015, were intriguing slices into a slightly different world. Now, you can, as I said before, you listen to these early singles and the Syd Barrett stuff, and you kind of go, yeah, very obviously, kind of wearing the Kinks influence on the sleeve. But then it was only a short matter of time later before every band was doing singles about teddy bears and tea and coffee and all these peculiarly British things. And I think probably Pink Floyd may have got a little bit lost in the shuffle compared to people like Kinks and so on, and doing all of that type of stuff. The Scarecrow then is the B-side of See Emily Play. See Emily Play was recorded by David Bowie for the Pin-Ups album, although the last live performance David Bowie had on British soil was to play and sing Arnold Layne and Comfortably Numb with David Gilmour at the Royal Albert Hall in 2006. Not one of the nights I saw David Gilmour at the Albert Hall. Damn. Or, as the policeman played by Liam Neeson in the Lego Batman movie has it, darn diddly arm. So be it. And then we had the third single released by the Pink Floyd, Apples and Oranges, backed with Paintbox, I think. Let me just quickly check. Yes, it is. Released on the 17th of November, 1967. So during Syd's period in the band, 3 singles, 1 album, and done. And it's amazing how little there is, and yet what an enormous influence all of that is. Flaming was released as a US-only single in November, 67. But more importantly, we had the first album released by the Pink Floyd. It was Piper at the Gates of Dawn, what we've all come here to hear me rattle on about, which was released on the 5th of August, 1967. Here is the 1994 CD edition of it. Here is the 1967 mono version of it issued on CD. Here is the 2007 3-disc expanded edition. And here is the my vinyl copy of it. A nice pair which is backed with, it's a double album released in 1974 with both Pink Floyd and backed with Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Disc 1, and Source Full of Secrets, Disc 2. This is my vinyl copy of Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And this one, let me just quickly check. I don't think this is the original release because I don't think it has the dentist on there, which was used without permission. American versions of this, by the way, feature a live version of the track Astronomy Domine instead of the studio version. This, I think, is the UK version, and it has to be filed under Popular. I think, let me just quickly check, that is Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Harvest Records. Although for some reason the inner sleeve is part Saucer Full of Secrets and part Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and then the second inner sleeve on the second side is the same, except it's green this time as opposed to blue. And if you want to pick up both Piper at the Gates of Dawn and Saucer Full of Secrets affordably, a nice pair will probably put you back about 20 quid, which is a nice affordable way of doing it. But of course, people that were buying these records at that point in time weren't buying them to sell them on 50 years later to you. They were buying them to listen to whilst they smoked evil ganja weed in their bedrooms and get high on the Mary Jane and all that type of stuff. Now, I know I'm being a little bit cynical here, but as somebody that has never ever taken any drugs, honest governor, no, I haven't actually. I'm allowed to be as cynical and square as I want to be about that. So this is the nice pair version of Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I did think about, should I buy the mono reissue of Piper at the Gates of Dawn for you, so I can show you a copy of that? And I thought, well, no, not really. It'll be 20 quid, and I haven't made a single penny out of any of these Notcasts so far, so I don't see any point investing money in something if all it's going to do is be on the screen for like 30 seconds, and I could spend that 20 quid doing something else, which, by the way, today I spent buying lots and lots of socks. If you want the mono edition of Piper at the Gates of Dawn on CD, of course, you'll have to go for this edition, released in 1997, in a nice fancy cardboard box that features, there's your CD, and there's, I think, a postcard or some art cards of Piper at the Gates of Dawn and some photographs of the band at that point, alongside something from one of the reissue programs. There's been quite a lot of Pink Floyd reissue programs, and here is the booklet that comes with the 1997 edition, that again features some photographs from a time I don't remember because I wasn't born then. Piper at the Gates of Dawn is, in my opinion, a fantastic, weird, psychedelic 60s album that is really super influential in a way in which perhaps you wouldn't necessarily realise. It kind of turns songs inside out. As I've said before, it's not about just what is being seen, but how it is being seen, the angle from which it is being seen is really important. And that's what makes this album, I think, stand up compared to a lot of its then contemporaries. The way that Syd especially was writing songs is that he was breaking the rules, but he was breaking the rules because he didn't necessarily know what the rules were as such. He was doing what instinctively felt correct and right to do, and to write songs that expressed a certain point of view, to quote Star Wars, as opposed to anything else. And so therefore, although the songs did have, beginnings, middles, ends, verses, choruses, bridges, and all those type of things, they weren't constructed or arranged in a way that necessarily made a huge amount of sense. Now, if somebody was sat there and going, I want you to put together a single and I want it to be this, sure, you'd get Arnold Layne, but you wouldn't get the Arnold Layne that has been released. You'd get a slightly different version of Arnold Layne. You get a different lyric, you get a different approach, and what you get is something a little bit flatter. You get something where all the peaks and the troughs of creativity and individuality, those sparky, little quirky bits that make something very individual, would have been flattened out like a steamroller. So, for example, all the things that make something interesting would have been blended out into a featureless plain, like a desert or something. And I see this when you see, action films written by committee or comedy films written by committee, is that you end up with something that's tested on humans for irritancy, and it becomes something that's acceptable to the lowest common denominator. And what you end up with is something that's really fucking boring. So, for example, if somebody was to do, and I'm going to use Shane Black here. Shane Black, screenwriter, he wrote Predator, Lethal Weapon, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Long Kiss Goodnight, Iron Man 3. If you took his movies and you put them through a committee grinder, those films would become really boring, because the plot of those films may seem on paper to be quite straightforward and quite conventional, but it's the way you tell them, as the terrible comedian once said, is that makes it interesting. And the idea that you flatten out all of the individual parts of it and you end up with these meaningless kind of plot robots that push forward the song, and the song becomes really boring and really, really dull. I kind of think also, if you think about movies, for example, there was a rise in the late 2000s of some really boring action movie stars, people like Jai Courtney and Sam Worthington. Sorry, guys, if you're watching this, what the hell are you doing? But if you're watching this, please don't. It's not that interesting. But as individuals, you'd end up watching people like Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, or Bruce Willis in Die Hard, or Arnold Schwarzenegger in any movie, and you'd kind of go, those people are a little bit quirky, a little bit interesting, a little bit different, and then you end up with these kind of like meaningless, bland, featureless, characterless objects that are pushing forward the plot, and the dialogue is merely placeholders. And you kind of watch something like, let's say, Terminator 4, or maybe Avatar, or what is it, Conan the Barbarian, or that there's a terrible film with Sam Worthington. In fact, most of his films are pretty bad. And you kind of go, nobody actually talks like that, because nobody's that boring. And you end up kind of going, well, why do you do things like that? Why do you have a bit where you go, I need to get the thing to the thing to solve the thing, where actually, a human being with a brain and a quirkiness would be like, if we don't get it to the thing by 9 o'clock, we're all toast and it's time to eat, or some other kind of nonsensical thing. A line like something in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I'm not going to quote because it's extremely rude, but it's about Drew Barrymore, and you kind of go, that's how some people talk. That's not how a screenwriter talks, because you'd take off all of the edges, and you'd have something that was just very flat and functional and brutalist. And when you think about things like brutalist architecture, for example, one of the reasons that they exist is to flatten human thought into thinking about what is and isn't acceptable. It's kind of like take out the concept of having anything that's different or weird. And things like Arnold Layne, See Emily Play, Apples and Oranges, almost everything that's on Piper at the Gates of Dawn, they're just a little bit weird. They're looking at the world a slightly different way. And what you have with this, especially, and with Piper at the Gates of Dawn, is something that is effortlessly created. There's the idea that these songs just kind of haphazardly just fall out of someone's brain whilst he's singing. And so you end up with, songs like Bike and Flaming and The Gnome and all that type of stuff. And you just get the feeling, well, he just did this, and then that happens, and, well, we stuck with it because it sounded quite good. And then all of a sudden, you're at the point where you've got something, and it's just bloody weird. And sure, there's nothing about it that you look at it and go, that's wrong. But you look at it and go, no human being would design that, but you don't need a human being to design that. It's not logic. Art is around expressing ideas and communicating ideas and emotions and thoughts. And that's the thing that makes art and not just merely functional music. And that's why I think Syd Barrett is so deeply loved. Although, of course, it is deeply frustrating to be a Syd Barrett fan, because his stuff is bloody strange, as Piper at the Gates of Dawn clearly testifies. And so Piper at the Gates of Dawn, well, I haven't told you, recorded at Abbey Road Studios in 1967. So in February, March, April, I think. For example, this was at the time where the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper's at Abbey Road. So in Studio B, where the Pink Floyd were recording Matilda Mother, for example, they stepped over the corridor to watch the Beatles recording Lovely Rita. on the 21st of March 1967. The idea that there were two albums made at the same time in the same studio, literally opposite sides of the corridor. Pretty amazing, actually, because, yeah, I do have a copy of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the pop band The Beatles, which you may have heard of. Not my copy, you will have heard of The Beatles. Was recorded at the same time. It's really odd, and that this was happening. And so the album, by the way, has hang on a moment. That the running order of starting with Astronomy Domine, which was I've seen performed live by David Gilmour, Lucifer Sam, which was covered by the Flaming Lips in 1996. And Astronomy Domine was performed at 40. Well, there were 14 different takes of Astronomy Domine, but they only used one of them. Lucifer Sam was recorded between the 12th and 18th of April 1967. Matilda Mother had 8 takes on the 21st of February 1967. We have Flaming, which was remixed for a US single release. Power Torch, which I don't know why I've starred that. Maybe it's an instrumental. And then Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, which I think is the only song that was written by Roger Waters. Roger, of course, later became, as he regarded himself, the creative genius of Pink Floyd. Although there wasn't much evidence of that to start with, I think it's fair to say. None of the people in the band at this point were really virtuosos. Syd was probably the most obviously talented. Nick was, probably a good drummer. Not the best technical drummer in the world, but exactly the right drummer for Pink Floyd. And Nick was probably the most disciplined of the band members in terms of focusing on a structure and time and a foundation for that. Roger Waters was, I think, self-described as barely competent. He could play bass, but you would never have singled Roger out as being the next great songwriter in the band. And then obviously Rick was just the guy who less is more, but did an absolutely great job. With Pink Floyd overall, by the way, this period and other periods of the band, they only played the notes that they absolutely had to make the song work, and somehow that gave the music a sense of, air and space, and the space between the spaces that's really, really important, rather than dubbing or overdubbing everything to death on there. We also had, as I said, Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, which was recorded on the 20th of March 1967. Interstellar Overdrive, which had 5 takes on the 27th of February 1967, and there is a take 6 is on the 3 CD version released in 2007. We then have The Gnome, which had 6 takes on the 16th of 19th of March. Chapter 24, which took its title from Chapter 24 of the I Ching, which has its concept and theme that all movement is accomplished in 6 moments, 6 stages, and the 7th brings return. The 7 is the number of the young light it forms when darkness is increased by 1. So not exactly a hugely original lyric, but an inspired one, because who else would have taken Chapter 24 from the I Ching and turned it into a song but Pink Floyd? Chapter 22 was recorded. Chapter 24 was recorded on the 27th of February 1967. You can tell I've got a bit of paper here that's got all these dates written down. And Scarecrow on the 22nd of March. And finally, Bike, the last song, never performed live by Pink Floyd, only performed live once by members of Pink Floyd, primarily at the Syd Barrett Memorial Concert in 2007, which saw Pink Floyd perform Arnold Layne for the last time, and then the remaining members of Pink Floyd, Rick, Nick and David, no Roger, performed Bike as part of an ensemble piece right at the end of the show. And that is Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which I think is a really good album. And if you haven't got it or haven't listened to it and you kind of think, oh, I really want to listen to it, I absolutely should. I strongly recommend it, but you shouldn't really listen to me. This is not my favourite era of Pink Floyd. I can appreciate it for what it is. It's not quite my thing, but I know it's really, really good. The 2007 version of Piper at the Gates of Dawn, by the way, has a stereo remaster of the CD. Yeah, It has a mono version of the CD there, and then it has a bonus CD of extra material featuring the A's and B's of the 3 singles I've already shown you. Arnold Layne, See Emily Play, Apples and Oranges, plus 4 extra tracks, a take 2 of Interstellar Overdrive that was on a French single, a previously unissued stereo mix of Apples and Oranges and Matilda Mother, and take 6 of Interstellar Overdrive there. Good, worthwhile, not absolutely essential. I don't think any of these tracks, by the way, appear on the early years box set. It also features a reproduction of one of Syd's notebooks from 1965, which takes the glorious title of Fart and Enjoy. And as somebody who has enjoyed a fart or two during the course of his life, I can confirm that is an option. That's overshare, isn't it? I shouldn't have said that. That's the problem, is when you do these things in one take and you just kind of start and talk in a monologue for what feels like a very, very long time indeed, you'll get to a point where, such as now, I'm a rambling and I don't quite know what I'm going to be saying in 2 minutes' time. It's a dangerous place to be, but hopefully the stakes are very, very low and nobody will really get upset if you really noticed. And then, yeah, so that is a reproduction of Syd Barrett's notebook from 1965, when he was, I think, a mere 20 or so, or thereabouts. We have some extra stuff which came out at around about this time. There was an abandoned single, a single recorded by the band but was never finalised and mixed, called Scream Thy Last Scream, Old Woman in a Casket, backed with Vegetable Man. And this gets an appearance on the first of the early years box sets, components, Cambridge Station, 1965 to 1967. And 1965 to 1967 has on it, as audio, some really good stuff. So it's got the 1965 recordings on the single, which I showed you there on CD, plus Arnold Layne, See Emily Play, Apples and Oranges, Candy in a Currant Bun, Paint Box, 2010 mixes of Matilda Mother, Jug Band Blues, In the Beechwoods, Vegetable Man, and Scream Thy Last Scream, of which Matilda Mother and Jug Band Blues did appear on a Syd Barrett best of in a remixed form. CD2 features the band recorded live in Stockholm in 1967, and that is an audience recording of the band performing live at the Gyllenstierklund, Stockholm, Sweden, on the 10th of September, alongside recordings for which are called John Latham studio recordings, which was going to be the soundtrack to a film of his called Speak that was never used. We also have a DVD and Blu-ray inside the early years, which features various TV appearances and mime stuff and interviews and so on and so forth. And you get some reproduction memorabilia inside the early years. Effectively, by the way, if you want to get everything, you probably need to get the 2007 3 CD version of Piper at the Gates of Dawn and the early years box set, and that will cover 99% of what the band released and recorded. You've got some flyers. You've got a reproduction flyer of Pink Floyd at the Commonwealth Institute. You've got a fold-out flyer for something here. Let's see what this is. Beatles Cream Lap Up Pink. So there you go. That's probably a news article about the Pink Floyd getting signed. A flyer for the Smokestack Lightning show. Flyer for a Mammoth Rave featuring the Pink Floyd there. Sheet music for Arnold Layne, should you ever want to play it on a piano. I'm sure it's probably hopelessly inaccurate. A reproduction newspaper clipping, a ticket for a show, which of course none of you will have got to, and then a flyer for the Games for May show, which took place at the Queen Elizabeth Hall on May the 12th, which took its name from a line in See Emily Play. And then there's a booklet with all your necessary, utterly unexciting copyright information in there. What I will say about the early years, by the way, is the early years box set is, I think, it's an absolutely fascinating treasure trove of inessential recordings by the Pink Floyd. There is nothing in there that you kind of sit and go, I do not know why that didn't come out, apart from Scream Thy Last Scream and Vegetable Man. Everything that's on it, you kind of sit there and go, yeah, it's pretty good, but, you know, see why it didn't come out. If you bought the full box set version of the early years, you've got this bonus set called Continuation, which features important recordings but of lower audio quality from 1967 to 1972. And this features, for your audio delectation, a BBC radio session with Syd from the 25th of September 1967, a BBC radio session from the 20th of December, and a radio session from 20th of December 2nd of December 1968. Now, these two radio sessions here, heavily bootlegged, the original tapes of which I don't think exist anymore, but however have been heavily bootlegged. Featured on this release called the Dollhouse Darkness, featuring versions of Paratorch and Astronomy Domine, recorded for the BBC on 14th of May, some stuff recorded or broadcast on the 1st of October 1967, featuring Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, Reaction in G, Flaming and the Gnome, and the Scarecrow Matilda Mother, which were originally for Top Gear. And then another 3 tracks recorded or broadcast on the 31st of December, Vegetable Man, Scream Thy Last Scream, Jug Band Blues, and Paratorch. These are again off-air recordings, so featuring AM and FM hiss. Not absolutely essential, but interesting to have. There's a couple of other releases from around about this period. This is the soundtrack to a film called London 66-67 that features two Pink Floyd tracks that aren't on the early years box set because they simply couldn't get the rights for them. Those tracks being Interstellar Overdrive, the full-length version that ran for 16 minutes, and Nick's Boogie, which ran for 12. And these are worth getting, but they're not the great missing link there. But you do need these if you're absolutely a completist and have to have everything. There was one more release. This is an unofficial bootleg CD of the Pink Floyd, and this I think is called Stand Alone, and it's recorded at the Star Club in Copenhagen. This is the other live recording featuring Syd Barrett that exists. There are only 2 live recordings of Pink Floyd with Syd that do exist. Copenhagen here. Again, it sounds like an angry geography teacher being thrown down the stairs while being trapped in a cupboard. It is not fantastic audio quality. That and the version that is on here are the only 2 live Syd Barrett era Pink Floyd recordings that exist that people can find. There's the BBC radio sessions, but they are the radio sessions, and so not absolutely 100% a representation of live Floyd. So Scream Thy Last Scream was an abandoned single. It was the last Syd recording. It was issued in November 2016, and it was recorded during the sessions for what was to become the second Pink Floyd album, which started in August 1967. And there was also a track called She's a Millionaire that was recorded at around about the same time that apparently turned into a solo song by Syd called Opal. And what we also had was on Monday, the 7th of August, 1967. So this was before Piper at the Gates of Dawn was even released. Well, more correctly, it was 3 days after Piper at the Gates of Dawn was released. The band went into the studio to start recording their second album with Syd that was going to become a saucer full of secrets. And at that point, they recorded tracks including Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, Remember a Day, Paintbox, and a couple of other ones, Abbey Road, and Sound Techniques that were hived off. And Paintbox was released as a B-side to Apples and Oranges, but they then went and started recording the album. So they also toured the UK at this point. They did a bizarre tour of places like town halls and theatres and winter gardens and places like that, where they'd play a 25-minute or so set alongside Jimi Hendrix and The Move and a number of other bands. And it then became pretty apparent that Syd was starting to struggle with things. The idea of that constant element of repetition, of touring, of the grindstone that went with it, I think had started to lose its appeal a little bit, I think. Because the idea is, well, you end up, you drive hundreds of miles up the motorway, you play for 25 minutes, you drive hundreds of miles back, you meet bands at service stations at 3 a.m, you get home, you're constantly knackered, you've got no money, and it's not very interesting, I imagine, at all. But there we are, and I think Syd had become less enamoured with that. So apparently, more through expediency than anything else, the band had recruited a second guitarist, David Gilmour. And David Gilmour was known to the band members from Cambridge, so he hung around with people that were in the band circle, such as Storm Thurgeson, for example. And for some strange reason, Storm, Roger and Bob Close had all been on the same rugby team. They'd been at school with Syd. David went to a school that was up the road. David and Syd had known each other before Syd had joined Pink Floyd. David had been asked if he wanted to join, and he joined the band as second guitarist and vocalist. So although Bob and Roger had formed the band, apparently, and then Syd had become by default the leader, it was no longer that band anymore. And so the idea that I think Syd was able to function is sometimes purely through expediency. If you're at a certain age, and remember this was 1967, 1968, individuals wouldn't necessarily have had the knowledge or the tools in which to understand the circumstances that Syd was in. So he probably had a degree of depression. It probably had a degree of maybe undiagnosed Asperger's or autism or something like that. Possibly kind of also apparently taking a lot of drugs at the time. And so therefore we had a combination of factors which made being a fully engaged, productive member of the Pink Floyd machine probably quite difficult. And as you know from creatives, we don't always work to time schedules. It's not a 9 to 5 thing. It happens when it happens, and you've got to do what feels right as opposed to what you're necessarily tasked with doing at that exact moment at time. And if it starts to feel like work, why would you do it? Why would you want to do it? And I think the band felt that by getting David on board, it would enhance and expand the band's ability to perform. And they performed several shows, I think 4 or 5, as a 5-piece. There was a photo shoot as a 5-piece. And then at one point, the decision was made to not have Syd participate in the group going forward. So David's first appearance with the band was on the 2nd of December 1967, which I think was at Aston University in Birmingham, subbing for a largely absent Syd. Even if Syd was physically present, he wasn't necessarily fully participating. And then at a certain point, the decision was taken to proceed without Syd in the band, and Syd to write remotely and work with the band in that aspect. There is one release I have not mentioned, which was released in 2017, too late to appear on the early years box set, found after the fact, apparently recorded at Thompson Recording Studio, Hemel Hempstead, on October the 31st, 1966. This also appeared at Their Mortal Remains box set as one of the releases there. It is Interstellar Overdrive, a one-sided 12-inch single, 40 minutes 57 seconds, which was released as a vinyl 12-inch limited edition. And that is the thing which I haven't mentioned so far. So that is Piper at the Gates of Dawn by the Pink Floyds, and the early years box set, the singles, and the London 1966-67 period. Overall, this is a period of the band that I really, really like. it's taken me, I've had to work to get to like this period of the band, because it's not naturally where I sit. So I think about this type of stuff, and I think about kind of twee stuff as well, that's a little bit weird and not really completely in my area of influence, or my area of particular passion, but it's part of the Pink Floyd story, and you can't fully understand the story of Pink Floyd without knowing this stuff and without listening to this stuff. It's a really key part of how Pink Floyd became Pink Floyd, if that makes sense. And I felt quite self-conscious actually now about the cover of A Nice Pair having a topless woman on, which I'd not really thought about before. Maybe I should move that over there or up there so that it doesn't get whacked out by the YouTube algorithms as being extraordinarily very rude indeed. I have a better idea actually, which I'll put it there like that. That should work, shouldn't it? So yeah, okay, this is awkward. Probably time for me to stop now. Piper at the Gates of Dawn is, I think it's aged very, very well. It's aged a lot better than a lot of the contemporaries from that period of time. But it is something that I experience historically now, looking at and going, yeah, that was very 1967. I don't think it could happen now. What it does clearly have, though, is a very unique worldview by a very talented person who has a very specific way of looking at and addressing certain factors, and that is Syd Barrett, who is a very talented bloke, and who ultimately, when I get to talk about his solo albums, will become increasingly apparent that probably could not have continued in the way in which he had done to start off with, because the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and Syd burns so very, very brightly. There you go. Didn't even know I was going to get a Blade Runner quote in. Anyway, take care of yourselves and each other. Take care. Stay beautiful. I'll see you all soon. All right. Bye.